wish I could say that I loved this movie, but that wouldn't quite be true. I loved the first hour and 54 minutes of it, but the last 20 minutes really frustrate me. If you've just finished I'm Thinking of Ending Things on Netflix, then you might be doing exactly what I did, which is Googling I'm Thinking of Ending Things Explained. Maybe that's even how you stumbled across this video. I watched Think Story's video about the ending, which offers a very comprehensive interpretation using both analysis of the movie itself and information about the book it was based on. I highly recommend it, but I'll give a very abridged recap here. Basically, Jake the janitor is imagining at the end of his life before his suicide what he could have been. Lucy, Lucia, Louisa, Amy, whatever you want to call her, does not exist. She's basically been created as part of Jake's fantasy, and they've been one and the same all along. As far as I know, this interpretation is pretty widely agreed upon due to the fact that it's decently explicit in the book, so I'm going to be taking it as read. This brings me to my first problem with the ending, which is its lack of clarity. I don't really want to linger on this one because it's honestly the most minor of my grievances, but I think it is worth mentioning. I don't know about you, but I honestly didn't really catch that meaning much from the movie itself. The identity overlap between Jake and Lucy is made pretty clear through several clues, but the specifics of this interpretation, that Jake is creating a fiction before his death of what his life could have been if he had just approached that one girl at that one bar, are far less clear. There are some hints towards it, yes, but to me, that meaning is ultimately obscured by the journey the final 20 minutes take into the bizarre, including a dance sequence, an animated pig, a Nobel Prize acceptance, and a song from Oklahoma. To be totally honest with you, I'm not sure how many people would have understood that meaning without the fact that it is much more explicit in the book. So to me, these surreal diversions at the end take away from that intended message. Obviously, this is incredibly subjective. I'm sure there are people out there who would tell me that it's just too cerebral and I'm too dumb to get it without the help of a YouTube video explaining the ending. But those videos do have hundreds of thousands of views, and explained is one of the most common fill-in search terms. Draw your own conclusions. My next problem with the ending, however, does boil my blood a little because I honestly consider it bad storytelling, and it's the way that the movie drops Louisa. She was clearly in the protagonist role from the beginning, which is signaled by the fact that she is the narrating voiceover we hear. We know her thoughts, which happens exclusively with her character and with no others, and the camera tends to follow her. She's pretty clearly the core of the film, and this is only heightened by Jessie Buckley's fantastic performance. We sympathize with her. We invest emotional labor in her plight. In my opinion, she's the most compelling character in the film, and watching her grapple with her transient sense of identity is just fascinating to watch. But instead of offering any, emotionally fulfilling ending to her arc, this movie makes a sudden protagonist shift sometime around the hour and 55-minute mark. We're instead forced to spend the culminating moment of 2 hours of emotional investment we have in Amy's story looking instead at Jake. At Jake, who has been set up as the villain for 2 hours. Okay, maybe villain is a strong word, but it is undeniable that he hasn't exactly been a sympathetic figure. He's been off-putting and somewhat volatile throughout, and our real protagonist clearly seems to be having issues in her relationship with him, however fake it may be, as she wants to end things. He's just not likable. And now, with literally no development or change from that vision of him we've gotten over the course of the movie, we're supposed to feel emotionally satisfied by watching him accept a Nobel Prize and sing a little ditty before going into the great blue beyond. He hasn't earned it. I can't suddenly accept him as the protagonist when the rest of the movie has done nothing but make him out to be the bad guy. And we get this ending for Jake at the expense of closure on Lucy, the cornerstone of the film that we have actually been sympathizing with the whole time. Instead, she's reduced to a passive, smiling face in the crowd, nothing more. She doesn't even get a bad ending that treats her character arc poorly. She's deprived of any ending at all. But wait, I hear you saying, if Louisa has just been a construct of Jake's fantasy all along, then the ending being about Jake means that it's actually also about her. All of the sympathy we have for Lucy is also technically sympathy for Jake, since they've secretly been the same person the whole time. But the thing is, even if Jake and Louisa have actually been the same person all along, they're still discrete characters. They're played by different actors who have imbued them with different personalities, and the camera's been following Jessie Buckley around, not Jesse Plemons. You can't say that the emotional investment we have in Lucy is instantly transferable to Jake, because they're not interchangeable. Jake still has to earn our sympathy, and in my opinion, he hasn't. To me, this makes the conclusion of this movie awful storytelling. It drops the compelling protagonist and all of the fascinating baggage associated with her, providing not a crumb of closure in the process, in order to heroically canonize her creepy boyfriend, despite not putting in a drop of effort at any point to show me why I should care about him. Speaking of not caring about Jake, let's talk about my final problem with the ending, which is the implications of his fantasy. Two issues here. The first is that him picturing how his life could have been if he had just approached that one girl implies that if only he had a girlfriend, it could have saved him. Contrast the sublime happiness portrayed in the marriage dance sequence against a disturbed Jake on the brink of suicide. It's like reverse fridging. For anybody who doesn't know, fridging refers to the trope where a man's girlfriend is killed off in order to fuel his emotional grief for his arc. For Jake, it seems that the cause of his emotional pain is not the loss of a woman, but never having one in the first place. Reads a bit incel to me. And yeah, correlation doesn't equal causation. Maybe it's unfair to say that the movie is saying the cause of Jake's mental health problems are the lack of a girlfriend. But if nothing else, it's certainly saying that those problems could have been fixed by putting a wife where his wife-shaped loneliness is. Which isn't great because of A, the problematic connotations of placing the responsibility on a wife to emotionally save her husband, and B, the misunderstanding of how mental health problems work and are helped. A girlfriend is not a depression band-aid. The second bigger issue with Jake's fantasy is the fact that Lucia in this movie is a real person out there somewhere. In this reality, Lucy is a stranger that Jake has projected on and fantasized about at length, and honestly, it's incredibly creepy. Imagine having someone you don't know thinking about you in their final moments, about how much better their life had been if only you had just been emotionally and sexually available to them. It's disgusting. Another reason to not feel sympathetic towards Jake, and yet here I am, forced to watch him accept a Nobel Prize in triumph. But it's not in triumph, really, because he's dead. The fact is, it's difficult to be mad at the movie for lifting Jake up like that at the end, because you can always argue that it's all just his fantasy, that the movie isn't necessarily endorsing him and putting a stamp of approval on all his actions, it's just showing us a glimpse into his mind. But the movie doesn't exactly condemn him, either. I mean, clearly we're supposed to feel some sort of emotional connection at Jake's conclusion because it's the lingering final moment of this 2-hour reality-bending behemoth. In fact, because Lucy, our previous protagonist, smiles and claps for him at this climax, it almost seems as though we're supposed to do the same. But whether the movie condemns or supports Jake is a thorny question, with no true answer to be found. To be honest, my dislike of Jake isn't why I'm mad at this ending. What I'm really mad about is that I feel robbed of closure for Lucy. If you want to sum up all my problems with the conclusion of I'm thinking about ending things, it all boils down to the fact that I just wish the ending was like the rest of the movie. About her. Because in my opinion, Amy is the core of this movie. She's integral to the love I have for the first 1 hour and 55 minutes of it. Imagine creating such an interesting character that she manages to be compelling despite being purposely and, by definition, vague and self-contradictory. Who manages to be sympathetic and even relatable as she grapples with bizarre and unreal circumstances none of us would ever face. She walks a tightrope line between universality and specificity, and she does so with ease. She's the cornerstone of I'm thinking of ending things. But then, just as she seems to be reaching towards that slippery truth of her existence, she's locked out of frame. A 3-card Monty switch tells us that actually the movie isn't about her, and it was never about her all along. Instead, it's about Jake now, and they would have us believe it's been about Jake the whole time. Lucy, Louisa, Lucia, Amy, it doesn't matter, because she doesn't exist. And for the last 20 minutes, I'm thinking of ending things commits what I consider a disservice to its audience and treats her accordingly.